Hey guys, so today we're going to talk a bit about the brand new Canon R7 and see how it stacks up against the current king of APS-C cameras, the Fujifilm X-T4. So, roll intro. And let's get started. So on May 24th, Canon announced the R7 and R10 APS-C mirrorless cameras. These are the first APS-C cameras in the Canon R line and will probably spell the end of the Canon M line. The R7 is a high-spec APS-C mirrorless camera that will most likely compete with the Sony a6600, the Fuji X-T4, and the Nikon ZFC/Z50, although I don't really count the ZFC/Z50 line. And the R10 is like the little brother to the R7, so it's a bit lower spec, also lower priced, but the R7 is really the interesting one, so that's the one we're going to focus on today. First, let's run through some of the R7 specs. I'm going to repeat these when I do a pros and cons and comparison list with the X-T4, so I'm going to ramble these off pretty quickly. First off, it's got a 32.5 megapixel CMOS APS-C sensor with dual pixel autofocus. For burst modes, it does up to 15 frames per second for the mechanical shutter and 30 frames per second for the electronic shutter. It has IBIS that's rated up to 7 stops. It shoots oversampled 4K UHD 30p, and it can shoot 4K 60, but that'll be line skipped or cropped. It does 10-bit video in HDR or in C-Log 3. It has a 2.36 million dot OLED viewfinder, a 1.62 million dot fully articulating touchscreen, 2 UHS 2 card slots. It's weather sealed, and it has a mic and a headphone jack. So now that we've covered the specs for the R7, let's compare it to the X-T4. Keep in mind that I don't own either of these cameras. I'm going off of the reviews on both of these cameras as well as specs found online. First, let's talk about the similarities between these cameras. They have the same mechanical shutter speed, they both have dual card slots, they're both weather sealed, they can both shoot in log profiles with their own respective logs. They both have mic jacks, and their articulating screens have the same resolution. Now let's look at the pros for Canon. First off, the R7 is going to come in at $1499, and it beats the Fuji X-T4 there, which comes in at $1699. Those are both retail prices. With the R7 being brand new, you're probably only going to find it at retail price, but we'll discuss that more later. So, big pro for Canon here is $200 cheaper on retail price. It's got considerably more megapixels at that 32.5 versus the 26 on the X-T4. And then another big advantage is that it has Canon's dual pixel autofocus, which, while Fuji's autofocus has vastly improved, the dual pixel autofocus still outclasses Fuji's autofocus system. Another advantage that the R7 has is its 7 stops of IBIS compared to Fuji X-T4's 6 stops of IBIS. And it beats it with the electronic shutter, where the Fuji has 20 frames per second electronic shutter burst mode. The Canon R7 has 30. Both of these cameras' 4K 30 is oversampled. However, the oversampling on the R7 comes from a 7K size sensor, whereas on the X-T4 it's coming from 6K. With battery life, the R7 will beat the X-T4 if you're using the LCD screen. The Canon R7 is rated for 660 shots on the LCD screen versus Fuji's 500. Another advantage on the R7 is that it has a dedicated headphone jack, whereas on the X-T4 you will have to use an adapter for the USB-C jack. Next up, we want to talk about handling. The R7 is going to handle more like a traditional DSLR, though not quite as thick, whereas the X-T4 is a bit of a slimmer body. It does have a good substantial grip on there in comparison to some of their other smaller cameras. However, the R7 is going to have a bigger grip, so if you've got big hands, R7 is going to be easier to hold. With Fuji, if you want that big grip, you have to go for something more like the XS10 or the XH1 or the upcoming XH2, or add a battery grip onto your camera. Finally, Canon has a large lineup of lenses between their EF, EFS, M, and RF line, and all of them are pretty well adaptable between cameras. So you have a pretty big lens selection to choose from, and that isn't even talking about third-party developers. All right, let's go into the pros for Fuji. First off, I said we'd revisit the price. The X-T4 may have a retail price of $1699, however, it was released in February of 2020, so it is very easy to find this camera either used or refurbished or even new in some cases from certain dealers for less than the $14.99 that the R7 is coming in at. Because the R7 was just released, that is the price that you're going to find it at. Another advantage with the X-T4 is that the sensor is backside illuminated versus front side illuminated on the R7. Revisiting the battery again, the EVF is also rated for 500 shots versus Canon's R7 rated only for 380. Another advantage for the X-T4 is that if you're shooting 4K 60, the crop is actually going to be considerably smaller. With the Canon R7, your crop in 4K 60 is going to be 1.81 on top of your already APS-C crop, giving you basically 1/4 of the sensor. On the Fuji X-T4, that crop is only 1.18. Another advantage, going back to the EVF, is that it is considerably more high res. For this, we're looking at 3.69 million dots versus Canon's 1.36 million dots. Revisiting the lenses, Fuji's lens lineup for the X mount is better than Canon's lineup for the RF mount APS-C. Because Fuji's cameras are all APS-C, apart from the GFX line, all of their lenses are perfectly developed for this body, whereas with Canon, yes, you can adapt other lenses, but if you want native RF glass that's going to fit right onto your body, you won't have very many options to choose from at launch. Next up, I want to mention that Fuji does have its excellent film simulations, and on the outside of that, you have the Fuji camera body. So with Canon, you're getting a camera. It's a tool. It's always going to be a tool. However, you can be inspired by that tool and what that tool can do. So the film simulations giving you the ability to emulate old film stocks and the construction and materials used in the body, as well as the design resembling old film cameras, can inspire someone to create something different. Lastly, the Fuji X-T4 can shoot in hybrid log gamma as well as its regular f-log. So if I had to make a buying recommendation right now, I mean, it really just depends what you're looking for and who you are. With the R7, you are getting that big lens library, whether that be RF lenses, EF lenses, EFS, M lenses, anything that you can adapt on there from their library of lenses. So if you are already invested in the Canon system, the R7 might be the way to go if you want an APS-C camera. Another thing is that if you don't like to buy your things used or gray market, then the Canon will beat the Fuji at its current price. And if you're someone that is going to be taking advantage of that ridiculous 30 frames per second electronic shutter, which is just at this point pretty much class leading for APS-C, again, Canon's gonna win. Now on the flip side of that, if you like the way that the Fuji cameras look and the film simulations that they shoot in, or you don't mind buying used and you get to save a little bit of money, or you want your 4K with less of a crop, the Fuji is going to beat the Canon R7 in many ways. Keep in mind that the X-T4 was released over 2 years ago, and we are finding that the R7 and the X-T4 are pretty evenly matched at this point. That's not something that we can just take lightly. As I said in my last video, the X-H2S is impending as well as the X-H2, and the specs on those are going to blow the Canon R7 out of the water. It will be a bit more expensive, but if you want to wait a little bit, Fuji does seem to release an X-T every 2 years, so that would mean the X-T5 should be coming pretty soon. And if it stays at the same price point or even goes another $100 up, a few $100 to get way better specs in the R7, I think that's worth it. Well, that about wraps it up. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. I might release another video this week, I'm not sure. I have a few videos that I filmed about a week and a half ago with my dad that I really wanted to get out, but the landscape of cameras keeps changing and I want to make stuff that's relevant. So this has to go up first. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below and I'll be happy to get to them as soon as I can. All right, have a great one.